A lot of noise has been talked about Percy Harvin being traded to the New York Jets from the Seahawks. Let's get to the bottom of it with Curtis Crabtree of KJR in Seattle, beat writer for the Seahawks. And Curtis, what is the story behind Percy Harvin? All this stuff has come out over the last couple of days. Is it accurate or is it a little bit blown out of proportion?
Well, most of it, I believe, is fairly accurate here. I mean, it's a combination of circumstances. It's no one thing that led to this trade happening, but from what I've been able to gather, the couple incidents that Percy Harvin was supposedly involved in with Doug Baldwin and Golden Tate both happened. He didn't want to go back into the game at the end of the Dallas game 2 weeks ago, which was part of an issue as well. And, just the on-field fit as well just wasn't there. And so all of those factors together kind of led to the point where they looked to move on from him and made the trade last Friday, but it was still a stunning development for sure.
So he was basically a pain in their ass, so much so to where Seattle said, you know what, forget it. Let's just get him out of here for a draft pick.
You can deal with the pain in the ass if it's working, but it wasn't working because they couldn't figure out the best way to take advantage of his skill set, to have the offense kind of fit around him as well. I mean, basically, this offense has always been at its best when Marshawn Lynch has been the primary option and everything else counters off of that. Well, they were trying to work Percy Harvin in as basically another primary option, and it just threw everything out of whack. They weren't able to, Harvin isn't the greatest route runner. They have to manufacture touches for him. They have to basically take away from their standard offense to try to get him the football and bubble screens and jet sweeps and those types of plays. And it just threw their entire offense into a funk, too. So when you add in the fact that the offense wasn't clicking along with him as well, yeah, when you've got a player that's a little bit troublesome to deal with, at some point it becomes not worth it.
Curtis Crabtree of KJR in Seattle on 104.5 The Team with Armen and Levack.
Curtis, does Seattle have to look at that Minnesota trade as a failure now, giving up the first rounder to get Percy Harvin?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely a failure. There's no other way you can look at it. They gave up 3 draft picks. It wasn't just the first rounder. It was a first, a third, and a seventh. And then they've given him $18 million over the last 2 years for 8 games worth of play. So, that doesn't come anywhere close to the production that he ended up giving them. The funny part is, in retrospect, him getting hurt and missing most of the regular season last year may have been their best thing that could have happened for him when it comes to the Super Bowl, because now all of a sudden Denver had never seen what he did the entire year, how they were going to use him or anything like that, and all of a sudden he was a big surprise to what they were able to show in the Super Bowl. If he played all season last year, maybe this exact same problem with the offense kind of crops its head a whole lot earlier. The fit obviously shows up that it doesn't work. They can't figure out the best way to try to get him integrated. The frustration boils up earlier and more frequently as well. And maybe they never make the Super Bowl last year. So all of it kind of goes hand in hand. But yeah, there's no other way you can look at it. You give them a very little bit of credit for realizing it wasn't working, cutting bait, and trying to get ahead of it when you did. But that doesn't all of a sudden make this a win-win situation. No, it's definitely something that cost them over the last 2 years.
Curtis Crabtree, a buddy of ours at KJR in Seattle, always here for us whenever we need to pick his brain, like this one, Percy Harvin traded to the Jets. Curtis, is there any way that John Idzik, with his past in Seattle, is there any way that he did not know about all this baggage that Percy Harvin was bringing?
No, they told him everything.
Okay.
He fully knew the entire situation going into this from what I've been able to gather. There's a lot there. There's probably more stuff too than even what's been reported about it that they had to tell him. They didn't give up much of anything to get him. Their risk level on this is very, very minimal. When it comes down to it, if Harvin completely bombs out in New York as well, and they decide to not keep him beyond this season, they give a 6th-round pick to Seattle, and they pay just the remainder of a $7 million in base salary for this season. Very little minimum commitment to him, but you could see if it could maybe the fit is there. Maybe they figure out something that works better for in New York than it did for Seattle. It's tough to really gauge, but Idzik, as far from what I've been able to gather, Idzik knew everything that had happened here, the situation, all of that sort of thing going into it. Idzik had been the cap guy here for a few seasons under John Schneider and Pete Carroll before taking the GM job back there. So, they've got a strong relationship. He'd been here even longer than that before Pete Carroll and Schneider had taken the job. So his familiarity with this franchise is pretty exhaustive. So that he went into this with wide eyes open, knowing what was coming.
Curtis, what's the panic factor like for Seattle right now? Can they get back on track and make a run in their Super Bowl?
Well, they can't get back on track. Their biggest issue right now, I think, was the offense sputtering, up until last week when they got rid of Harvin. And all of a sudden, in the second half of their game against St. Louis, the offense kind of kick-started back to life and started to look like it built itself again for a little bit. Their defense hasn't been as stout as it's been in the past. Ultimately, Austin Davis completed 18 of 21 passes against them last week. Now, it wasn't for a whole lot of yardage, but still, that's not something Seattle's very typical of doing. And also, they have 14 guys that were banged up at some point last week. They had 5 starters out. Derek Coleman broke his foot in pregame warm-ups before the game. Jeremy Lane's on short-term injured reserve coming back from groin injury. They had a couple more rotational players that were out with injuries last week as well. And then they had 4 different guys get banged up and have to miss a play or two at some point in the game against St. Louis, too. So, they're going to have to try to weather the storm of their injuries for the time being here. Luckily for them, this is the lull of their schedule. Where the opponents they're playing aren't as tough as they're going to see at the end of the season. So they need to hope they can get back healthy, get things turned around. But, when this team's at full strength, it's still as talented as anyone in the league. But they've got to get things back on track and right it and point it in the right direction.
Curtis Crabtree of KJR in Seattle. And Curtis, with all the reasons you gave us as to why Seattle is struggling, Earl Thomas bringing up the referees, is that a reason? And obviously that can't rank towards the top of with all the other issues that you brought up on the team this year.
No, they were the most penalized team in the league a year ago. I think they're well on track to being the most penalized team again this year. And, it's ultimately just something they've got to get over. I understand Earl Thomas was frustrated by it, but, come on. The referees didn't completely blow a punt coverage last week where they didn't know that the punt went to the other side of the field and Stedman Bailey returned it 90 yards for a touchdown. The referees didn't blow the kick coverage that allowed Benny Cunningham a 75-yard return to set up a touchdown in the first half. They didn't, allow the Rams to run a fake punt on them to ultimately keep the ball away in the closing minutes. All of the above, the referees didn't do that. They point to the last play of the game, basically, where the fumble happened, and they should have reviewed it or anything like that. Well, you know what? If he doesn't fumble the football, the game's over anyway. So it's a little bit of a hollow argument, I think, on that regard. And at some point, I think that's just the frustration in general kind of boiling over there for Earl and expressing it in a way that probably wasn't the best idea.
Curtis Crabtree of KJR in Seattle, the beat writer for Seahawks, Mariners, Huskies, all of his stuff at Curtis_Crabtree. Curtis, we have a Seattle guy that works with us, Brady Farkas. He is so friggin' addicting to Seattle sports. You guys will get along. He kind of drives us nuts, but I think you and Brady would like each other. I'm not going to lie to you. I know he follows you on Twitter, so I know
I gotcha.
We all appreciate you, man, and always appreciate you jumping on as well. So thanks, Curtis, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
No problem, guys.